get to Rachel Reeves, who over the weekend granted an interview where she said, I didn't know, I was wrong about the tax situation and the fiscal structure of the UK, and that's why I had to increase, put in so many taxes. So let's listen to her explanation here over the weekend.
I was wrong on the 11th of June. I didn't know everything, because when I arrived at the Treasury on the 5th of July, so just under a month after I said those words, I was taken into a room by the senior officials at the Treasury, and they set out the huge black hole in the public finances beyond which anybody knew about at the time of the general election, because the previous government hid it from the country, they hid it from Parliament, and indeed they hid it from the official independent forecaster, the Office of Budget Responsibility. And so when I went into that budget last week, I had to put our public finances back on a firm trajectory, because we saw in the previous Parliament what happens when government loses control of the public finances. And the first commitment we made in our manifesto was to bring stability back to the economy, and that's what I did on Wednesday.
OK, but before we go on to that...
All right, let's talk to Shaun Shaun Richards, actually. He is in the UK. He's an economist that is going to talk to us about what's going on in the UK and also possibly the US election. Shaun, thank you so much for joining us. Good morning to you. So what did you make of what we just heard with the Chancellor of the Exchequer saying she was wrong about those taxes?
Well, good morning, everyone. There was quite a bit of that was very uncomfortable. If you follow the UK situation, you'll know that these factors were pretty much known. The idea of a black hole is really difficult. There was a lot of talk of that in 2022, and now it's all disappeared. So it was a bit of a fantasy. You see, one of the problems with this sort of thing is when you forecast the future, you can forecast almost anything, and some people do. If we come back to Rachel Reeves' position, then the UK has a lot of bodies looking at the finances, a lot of bodies looking at economic growth. And the idea that they were caught out isn't true. There was an issue through this with the previous government changing national insurance. So there were numbers there, but everyone knew that months and months ago. So I'm afraid it doesn't stack up.
So do you think, Shaun, that she says they've wiped the slate clean, they don't need to come back to raise taxes in the future? Do you believe that?
No. If we actually listen to her words, she said she'd brought back more fiscal credibility. Well, in fact, she's borrowed more. So in terms of stability going forwards, things for the UK are worse. And then there's another factor here. You see, if governments are going to be tough, it's usually when they come into power, because it's furthest away from election. So you put the bad news in then. I'm sure people will be familiar with that if you're new to a business or something like that. You load everything up at the beginning, don't you? But if she's saying she's borrowing more now, well, when we're approaching an election, then she's likely to borrow more again, isn't she? So that's what's concerned the financial markets. And that's why we've seen UK bond yields go higher. Now, I understand in an international perspective, the 4.5% the UK saying to some people watching this might not seem that high, but for the UK it is. And because of COVID and factors around then, the UK has borrowed quite a bit more money. So this has become an issue. So she's brought more money in. She's actually spent more in terms of her allowances. And the fear is that she'll spend more again. And so, if you like, for those that have read economic textbooks, this is classic tax and spend territory.
Now, Shaun, there's been a lot of pushback on the higher, we're looking at the highlights now of the bill, of the tax increases in the budget. The national insurance contributions, so those are going up. They've reduced the threshold for payments, meaning more businesses are going to be captured there. I think there's going to be a demonstration on the 19th of this month in central London. What do you make of those higher national insurance contributions and how they'll impact businesses?
Well, the issue here in the UK is employers' national insurance, which are those not aware, it's a type of income tax in a form, except that this one's put on businesses. But it's been called a tax on jobs. That's the problem. How does this work out? Now, when the announcement was made, it looked like that it was going to be slightly less than what people were expecting. What do I mean? People were expecting a 2% rise, and it was actually 1.2%. But then they announced they were getting more money in, so there was obviously some sort of swerve in the numbers. And then it came out that they were cutting it to a lower level, £5,000 a year. Now, this has a classic sign of a chancellor coming in and going to the Treasury, how can I get this money? And someone goes, I have a cunning plan. The problem with cunning plans like that is that they might look very good in the civil service bureaucracy world, but when you actually come to the real one, it creates a problem. Because for smaller businesses, those struggling, £5,000 a year isn't a lot of money, and it applies pressure there. So personally, I don't think that's a very good idea.
Shaun, I got to get your thoughts. I know you don't like talking politics. You want to stick to economics, but how do you think whoever wins in the U.S., the big election tomorrow, how do you think that impacts UK-US relations, particularly on trade?
Well, the Donald says that he'll bring in trade barriers anyway, doesn't he? And I think that's a generic we're seeing around the world. For example, we've seen the European Union recently put on tariffs on car imports from China. So I think that's something that's in play. For some of the other factors are harder because, you see, the actual present US government has been a spender, like the Shirley Bassey song, Hey Big Spender. But the Donald spends as well, doesn't he? So I think that's something we're going to get, almost whoever wins, that there'll be more fiscal expenditure. That's an issue around the world. Between the other two, it's sort of harder to say, isn't it? The Donald's a known element, isn't it? There's probably no one more famous around the world. So there's probably more uncertainty as to what Kamala would do. But in another example, swinging the other way, I heard you mention immigration earlier. But how's the Donald going to send 14 million people back or whatever he's saying? That doesn't sound right, does it? So there is still quite a lot of uncertainty.
Shaun Richards, economist, I think we've got to bring you back after the results of the election just to get your take on how things are going. Thank you so much for joining us from the UK to give us your thoughts on the budget and also, what we could expect over in the elections. Thank you so much. Shaun Richards there in London, economist.